recorded. So if you not not appear in the recording, please keep your camera off. Otherwise, we'd love to see your faces to create a more interactive atmosphere. And questions are very welcome. You can post them in the chat to ask them directly during the Q&A session later. And we also have some questions in advance, so maybe we can ask them later. So let's get started. Tessa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Coco. I'm just going to share my own screen if that's okay. I've added a few slides. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, we can see it.
Can see? Great. Well, hi everyone. It's so great to be here, and thank you so much to the Japan Youth Council and to Kokoa in particular for all the organisation you've done behind the scenes. My name's Tessa Vincent. I'm from New Zealand, but I'm calling you from London today, and I work as the Capacity Building Manager at the International Climate Council's network. And I wanted to start by really emphasising the important role that youth play in the climate movement. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if I fit the bracket anymore, but I am so pleased to see so many people on this call who are passionate about taking climate action and who realise that policy is one of the best solutions that we have at our fingertips. And from a personal note, and to hopefully show you that your voice really matters, in New Zealand, our climate commission was essentially established from the Zero Carbon Act. And the first group to start advocating for the Zero Carbon Act was a youth group called Generation Zero. And they, wrote a draft bill based off what was happening in the United Kingdom, where the UK Climate Change Committee already existed. And they started advocating to politicians, just like many of you are considering in Japan. Gradually over time, they were able to onboard sort of business voices in New Zealand and other key stakeholder groups to show that there was, across civil society, across business, real interest in establishing the New Zealand Climate Commission, which now has around 70 staff members and a very senior commission board of around eight members. So I really wanted to start by emphasising that there is an important role for all of you on the call to play in getting the right policy in place, but also getting the right governance, the right bodies to make the change that we need in the policy realm. So what is the International Climate Council's network? Well, you can see on this map that there are 25 countries who have advisory bodies known as climate councils that are officially mandated by their government to provide climate policy advice. And we have representatives from Mexico to South Africa to Australia to Canada. And very pleased to have Jeppe on the call today from Denmark to really bring it to life what it looks like at a country level. Every climate council is different. Some are called councils, some are called commissions, some are called authorities, and they play a unique role depending on the context in their country. So for you, I understand there's lots of people from different countries on the call, but if you're in Japan, you'll need to think about what the relevant context you're operating in and what kind of role a climate council could play. They advise on how to reduce emissions, mitigation, they advise on how to adapt to a changing world, and they advise on the just transition so that we can bring all people along as we address the challenges of climate change. I really like some research that sort of points out that climate councils are different, but that they have 4 key roles. They're knowledge brokers. So I think, Kokoa, you've really emphasised in this process the importance of embedding science into policy, and our climate councils play a key role there. They're conveners, so they often bring together business and civil society, and some do so more than others. So, for example, in South Africa, the business voice is directly represented. They are advisors to government, and they are also watchdogs. So, importantly, tracking progress, often on an annual basis, and understanding how government is progressing against their recommendations and other policy recommendations. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I understand many of you on the call are trying to build the case for a climate council in Japan. We have a policy brief on our website that goes into why climate councils are useful, and I would recommend having a look at that. But one of the key reasons is they actually take into account long-term decision making. So they operate beyond political cycles, which are often sort of 4-year terms, and they think about the long term. So long-term targets that we should be working toward, transition plans within different sectors, and this creates policy certainty. And it also enables people to see what kind of direction we can move to, and for the real economy, for business and civil society to support that direction of policy. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but essentially, what does the International Climate Council do? Well, we want to improve national and international climate governance through effective climate councils. And in the long term, we want to see climate science being included in policy. We want stronger democratic participation to strengthen climate governance, to enable more investment in climate solutions, and to support countries to implement what the international ambition is at the national level. We are a very small team at the moment, 3 people, so but we really are member-led and rely on working collaboratively with our members across 3 areas. So building capacity of members, raising the profile of climate councils, which we think we want to do so internationally, and to strengthen the network by protecting existing councils and potentially bringing in new ones, which hopefully you can think about for your country on this call. And here's some logos from our members, just demonstrating that we have, a range of organisations involved in the network, a range of people from all over the world who are really working very hard to ensure that we have the right policies in place to incentivise faster and more effective climate action. And I'll just pause there. You can see our website. I'll put it in the chat as well, but you can also follow us on LinkedIn, and very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So some of you may have questions, but let's move on to the next presentation. Jeppe, over to you.
Thank you, Kokoa, and thank you, Tessa. I will try to share my screen as well. See if you managed to see.
Yes, we can see it.
You can see it? Excellent. So thank you so much for the opportunity to tell a little bit about the Danish Council on Climate Change, one of the members of the ICCN that Tessa was talking about. My name is Jeppe Wohlert. I'm head of international action on climate change at the Council. And I'd like to briefly get around 2 different topics today. One is presenting the Council as it's formally constituted according to law. And then I'd like to briefly touch upon the significance of the Council in the context of Danish climate policy. So the Council as an independent organ, we had a revision of the Climate Act in 2020, right? So we had the first Climate Act in 2015, and the independence of the Climate Council was strengthened with the revision in 2020. And I wanted to follow up on Tessa's point that it actually matters to form councils as a youth group. We have one in Denmark, the Youth Climate Council. I know they're about to set one up in Greenland. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that the revision of the Climate Act in 2020 was actually the product of a citizen initiative, right? So in the Danish Parliament, it's written into law that if a suggestion from a citizen receives more than 50,000 signatures, then Parliament is forced to discuss the proposal. And this is exactly what happened in 2019. Right. So my point is that it does matter when climate initiatives come from the ground and up. It did for us, at least. So the Council in Denmark, I will get into the independence of it, but just to give you a basic understanding of how the Council works and the Secretariat. So these 9 Council members, they meet around 12 or 14 times a year, and then they discuss the analysis and the work that we produce in the Secretariat, right? That's the division of labor. And it's also to say that it's actually a group more than it's just 9 individuals. And they do spend a fair amount of time engaging in the products that we make. So these are the 9 members in detail. We have a chair and 2 co-chairs. They form the leadership of the Council. We have 1 member from outside of Denmark. She's from Norway. But other than that, then all members come from universities in Denmark. And it's actually specified in the law, the range of different topics that we need to have specialists within. Right? So there's a reason to the spread of competences in the Council here. And one of the things that was written into law securing the independence of the Council, one is, you could say, the nomination process. So all universities in Denmark are asked to propose new members when we have open positions. And then the existing members of the Council discuss the applications, and they decide upon the preferred candidates. And they also decide upon who should be the chair and who should be the co-chairs. Then they send the recommendations to the minister, who's informed about the decision and formally appoints the members, right? So this has so far since 2020 been a formality. But it's also interesting to notice that it's still political whether or not the ministry decides to follow the advice of the Council, right? Just to say that I think that we have one of the better climate acts in internationally speaking, but there's always a political. I'm sorry, someone has forgot to turn off their microphone. So I'm hearing some talk in the background, but it's still a political decision whether or not to support the Council. This is also relevant in the context of funding, since we're funded by the national budget, and we are financed for 3 years at a time, right? So in 2026, there needs to be a discussion on whether or not to continue the existing funding of the Climate Council. Historically, our funding has gone up, so that's a positive story. But just to say that this is still a political decision. So our cloud, our work is dependent on the broad support in Danish Parliament of the Climate Council. We currently have 3 targets in the Climate Act, the Danish climate law. So the 2025 target speaks of a 50 to 54% reduction compared to 1990. Then we have a 2030 target of 70% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and the ambition to become climate neutral in 2050. We are currently on track to meet our 2025 target and the 2030 target. So we still have some years left. I will explain in detail, but one of the things that we do is monitor the progress towards this 2030 target. So if we're on track, that doesn't mean that we will be on track next year. Targets are also set 10 years in advance. So this is a special year for us, 2025, because this is the year when we have to decide upon the target for 2035. Now, some of you may be familiar with the climate plans that each nation is required to submit to COP30 this year. Europe is a little different than other parts of the world because it's the EU, the European Union, that submits a target for 2035 on behalf of all member countries in the Union. So they submit this to the UN. So this is a national debate in Denmark about the target in 2035, which is it's not unrelated, but it's not formally related to the NDC that the Union will present to the COP30. So we have, in brief, 3 roles, you could say, much in line with what Tessa was talking about. The foremost role is the role as a watchdog, right? So we follow and report on the Danish national climate targets, and in addition, the obligations that we have towards the EU, right? So we have national climate targets in Denmark, and then the European Union also has climate targets. And that means that in addition to our own obligations towards our national climate law, we also have obligations towards the EU. So what's the difference? In legal terms, you could say the consequence of not fulfilling our national targets, again, is a very political consequence. It's up till the national parliament what the consequence will be. And we really haven't seen this historically yet. So it will be interesting as we approach 2030 and whether or not we will be in line with our legal obligations in the national climate law. Then the EU has a tad more, you could say, hard legal consequence, because the EU has a procedure for member countries that do not honor their obligations towards the EU, right? So this could mean eventually that the EU would file a lawsuit against Denmark. But again, whether or not this happens in 2030, if certain member states do not fulfill their obligations toward the EU climate targets, we will wait and see. If it's only a few countries, I would suspect that there will be the standard procedure of threatening to file a lawsuit against the member country. But if it's more than just a few countries, I'm actually not sure what the European Union would do, because there's always a political consideration of the coherence and the unity of the European Union. Second role is the role as an advisor. So we provide evidence-based advice to the government and the parliament about what could be concrete climate policy that we assess would enable Denmark to fulfill its obligations towards the national climate target and the EU climate targets. And then the third role is the role as a public debater. So we contribute and participate in the public debate. We submit opinion ads, op-eds to newspapers. We participate in national discussions and panel debates. This is the more, you could say, softer role of the council. It's not as strictly written into law as the two other roles, but for me, this is a very important role in terms of ensuring this political backing of the climate councils, of the climate policy, and eventually also the consequences of fulfilling and not fulfilling our National Climate Act, right? So it's important, even though it may be softer and less visible, or it's actually very visible, but less. I just say it's an important part of our role in Denmark. And now this image is the image of, you could say, the policy cycle, in the yearly policy cycle in Denmark, in which we take part concerning the climate policy, the Danish climate policy. So actually, I'll start at 3 o'clock in spring, in April, when the Energy Agency, which is part of the Ministry for Climate in Denmark, publishes the climate status and sorry, I can't see, an outlook report, which is basically the data fundamental for discussing whether or not we are on track and whether or not climate policy is sufficient. So it's the basis of all climate policy debate in Denmark. And this provides us with the law-bound task of commenting on this data foundation for the climate policy in Denmark, which we do in May and June. I think this has been very important for the first couple of years, since the beginning in 2020, when the indicators and general data foundation for climate policy in Denmark was construed. In recent years, it's been more of a formality for us to comment on the data, which I think is more or less in place. And then in September, the government presents its official climate program, which again provides us with the law-bound task of commenting on the sufficiency of the climate program. We do this briefly normally in the fall, and then in December, it's written into law that Parliament can impose on government to a duty to act, which basically means that if Parliament does not find the climate program sufficient, then they can impose on government to do more, which has happened one time in the first year of our new Climate Act. And then eventually in February, we publish our yearly status report, with a review of the government's policy and whether or not it's made likely that government policy is on track to meet climate targets in 2025 and 2030. And then lastly, I'll highlight 3 arguments for why I think the Council plays a significant role in Danish climate policy. They're all interrelated, and I think the first important argument is that we're an independent evaluative body, and we serve the Climate Act. We don't serve the government, and this enables us to have a critical perspective on the climate policy of the current government, right? And part of this independence, of course, is whether or not there's a legal basis for it. And then the second part is whether the funding is ensured, and how this funding is ensured. And then the third part of it, as I mentioned before, is the political backing of the Parliament. The second part is that we're an institution devoted to thinking long-term transition towards climate neutrality. As Tessa mentioned, this is one of the things that you can say is common ground for most members in the international community of climate councils. And what I mean to say here is that it enables us to have a long-term perspective on a long-term transition. It's really not long-term, but in policy cycles, more than 4 years in Denmark at least is long-term. So this is not something you would expect of a government to consistently have this long-term focus on whether or not we are progressing, whether or not our initiatives are sufficient, and so forth. And then the third reason, I think, why we play a significant role in Danish climate policy is that we present impartial evidence-based advice on policy instruments, right? So what we do attempt to present is concrete policy that government would be able to enact, to decide upon, which we believe would keep Denmark on track of reaching our goals in 2030 and 2050. It's a constructive perspective, which I think is important. It's also a constructive perspective that that you could say transcends the research, the science, and the solid evidence base, and requires the council to lean a little bit forward and translate from evidence and from the data what do we believe is necessary to move forward. And this is always a balance, and it's a balance of whether or not we are perceived too political or not. And just to give an example of some of the advice that we have put forward, I think the most important is a greenhouse gas emission tax, which has been part of our recommendations since I think 2017, 2018. And it takes a while, it has taken a while for this advice to be implemented in national policy, right? So we have today a greenhouse gas tax on industry, which I think came about five years after we talked about it. In the beginning, the whole idea of a greenhouse gas tax was ridiculed in policy in Denmark. And then after 5 years, it became the norm for the industry. And we recently introduced a tax on agriculture, a greenhouse gas tax on agriculture, which in the beginning was a political nightmare. And again, something that many political parties perceived as ridiculous. And I know this is the first greenhouse gas tax in the world, right? So it's something that in many countries political parties are not able to talk about. So this consistent long-term advocacy for concrete policy advice, I think, is very important. And that's all for me.
Thank you very much. It was really insightful, and we can see many things that maybe we can learn from the Danish Council on Climate Change when we try to establish climate change advisory bodies in our countries. So let's move on to the Q&A session. Do you have any questions? You can write in the chat or just talk. If there isn't, I'd like to ask the questions. Oh, yes.
So there's one question, Coco, about whether or not I was talking about a carbon tax. It's a tax on greenhouse gas emissions generally, which we have on industry and on and agriculture, and then we have a tax on consumption as far as international travel. Very, very small tax, but still a tax on consumers, a flight tax, you could say. And if I can add, I think introducing the tax is a very important first step. And then it enables you to continue discussing whether or not the tax is sufficiently high in order to meet targets. But it's a battle won of just introducing the tax in the first place. So the same goes with agriculture. It's a fairly low tax, but I think this the symbol of it is it's a hard-won victory.
Yeah, is that tax then reinvested into climate-specific projects, or does it go to the general financing?
That's a good question. So it is it's invested again into to agriculture, the tax on agriculture, and I'm pretty sure the tax on industry is the same story. And I think this is a general way. So the EU has the same with their what's the word for it? I forgot the word in English. So, but the EU does the same thing. So a form of tax is it's reinvesting the funding into the industry or the different sectors in order to transform them.
I have one question. You told us that like universities were asked to like select some members for climate change council, and then climate change council will select the members. But in the first place, like who chose a member when there was not a Danish Council of Climate Change?
In the first place, it was the minister. And that was the minister's privilege during the first 5 years of the first Climate Act. And then in 2020, it became the privilege of the council with the formal approval of the minister.
The appointment process is something that we, as the International Climate Councils Network, are trying to gather information on. It's sometimes not very clear, and it's actually, as you're pointing out, a very important part of setting a climate council up. But I should mention that in June, at the end of June, we'll be launching a toolkit on how to establish a climate council, and it will be on our website, and we're trying to get it translated into Japanese as well. So thank you all. I know there's lots of different languages on the call, and being an English speaker, appreciate being able to speak English today. We will try to have different translated versions, and it will cover aspects like appointment processes and some of those first steps that you might take in setting up a council.
Thank you so much. I think a toolkit will be really useful in many countries. And I would like to ask the questions I got from participants in advance. So, like, what kind of difficulties were there when the council was established? Like, was there any political oppositions?
That's a good question. I only worked here for the past year and a half, so my historical knowledge in detail is limited. I think following the council from a citizen perspective, the general challenge was to establish a council that was respected for the advice that was presenting. So as I was saying, introducing the idea of a greenhouse gas tax in Denmark, it was not necessarily a new thing in science or in academic research, but in policy circles, it was a difficult thing to even get to talk about. And then having an institution which was critical of the minister, that actually resulted in what was publicly known as at that time, chair being fired by the minister. So he was not his chair was not renewed for another period. And I think the positive aspect of this was there was a perfect storm in a positive sense. So in 2019, there was the citizen proposal of a new climate act with concrete targets, like I talked about. But the second thing that was important, well, a few things. Then there was a very dry summer, which I think opened up the perspective of climate change as something that could be already or something that could become real. And then the third reason, I think, which was important in terms of securing a more independent council, was a parliament being very critical of the minister back then, firing the chair of the Climate Council. So it actually had the, you could say, the reverse consequence of renewing the Climate Act with an even more independent Climate Council. But it might have turned out differently had it been a different political climate in 2019.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
There's I was just going to add that there's a few different angles that the establishment of climate councils have pushed back from. Possibly one kind of key question that comes up is why establish another institution when you have government departments? And shouldn't we kind of focus on government departments? I think Jepe's point about independence is a unique value add that councils have, and also that laser focus on climate and climate policy as well. But we are seeing in some countries that pushback coming up. Another is just thinking about who would be in opposition to a body like this, and there might be sort of vested interests in the business sector that might be in opposition. But at the same time, we have spoken with, for example, the Japan Climate Initiative, which is a more positive climate business voice. So for you on the call, if you're thinking about your strategy, who can you work collaboratively with that might come from a different perspective. So as I say, I know New Zealand the best, and we really saw the coming together of youth groups, of business, sustainable business groups. And we also had a Minister of Climate Change that was trying to consult across different parties and working collaboratively with different politicians. So talking to politicians across the political spectrum will be important to any work to set something up like this. Otherwise, you do run risks of a new government coming in, and you run risks of the body being disestablished. Another key aspect to protect climate councils is their establishment in law, and thinking about any legislation that's coming through, any law that's coming through where the role of climate councils could be included. And organisations like Client Earth, I know they have in Asia, Client Earth now, play a really key role in shaping laws and supporting countries with climate framework laws.
Thank you very much. There's also another question in the chat. Are there any conflicts of interest between elected politicians and university-nominated council members? Japan is not the only country where politicians suspect acting.
I didn't really hear the question. Sorry. Trying to see the
No
chat.
worries, it's in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any conflicts of interest between elected politicians and university-nominated council members?
Any conflict of interest between politicians and nominated members?
Yes.
Was that the question? Yeah. I don't think no. I don't think there is a conflict of interest. So all council members are professors at Danish universities. Some of them are part of management at universities, right? So our chair is also the president of the Copenhagen Business School. I'd say in a softer way, especially in a small country like Denmark, you do meet politicians in different contexts. So there's no formal conflict of interest, but yeah, just in general, you would have you need to separate the different hats that you're representing as a council member and as a chair of the council, so forth. That goes with any kind of job. This one as well.
Tessa, do you have any examples in the world where there's a conflict between politicians and university nominated council members?
Well, I think the firing of the previous or the not renewing the second period of the previous chair, that was an example of a conflict of interest where the minister had he was empowered to hire and decide upon who should be sitting in his council. I think, like I said, the revision of the law, it eliminated part of this, making it more difficult for the minister to actually do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say as well that around the world it's not always university nominated council members. They can be often they are or have kind of that academic background, but there's also on the UK Climate Change Committee, for example, a business champion, and that's the Nigel Topping, who used to be kind of a UN, United Nations business climate champion at the global level. There's various expertise from economists to policymakers in Australia. Their chair used to be a politician himself. And so, just to point out that there are sort of multiple sectors of society that are sometimes represented. But in terms of conflicts of interest, it's a tricky question. I think it's that whole point that the governments, it does depend that they can ignore or they can accept advice. One of the best mechanisms we see, though, is a requirement in law for the politicians to respond to Climate Council advice. And it means that there's more of a dialogue there, and also practical things like ensuring there are meetings between ministers and the climate councils at a regular cadence. Because while you may have different views, it's also important to have a good working relationship with the politicians so that the recommendations are taken on board and climate policy can move forward. And that's not always easy, but something that everyone should be conscious of in setting up a climate council.
So you said there is some countries that they have to have a meeting between ministers and councils. Like in which country?
So in Denmark, for example, I think the whole policy cycle I was explaining before in the presentation, that's a way of doing exactly what Tessa was mentioning, of establishing a dialogue between government, parliament, and climate council, which is very necessary. And writing that into law when and how this debate takes place is fundamental for the influence of the recommendations of a climate council. And then in addition to that, we do have presentations of our work to the minister and the ministry, especially our yearly status outlook, which evaluates climate policy. And we're trying to establish a dialogue with the minister and the ministry. And in addition, we also talk with individual members of parliament to the degree that they wish to elaborate on some of the points or just generally understand what we're doing.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important to have the duty and to ensure that government and parliament will respond to the climate councils. Mm-hmm. And another question from participants in advance. I think there are many climate change councils in the world. Which case should we, from which case we should learn, and what kind of things are important to establish climate change councils in Japan?
Should I start, Tessa? So I think you should use what you can. So like Tessa was saying, members of there are very different and many different climate councils across the world. And they are different partly because of different political contexts and different legal foundations for their work. So you should consider what kind of climate act that you would want a climate council within. What is the political context of your country? And then you could be inspired by different models that you could that could influence the debate in your country. I'd say even for us who actually tomorrow it's our 10 years anniversary, we still keep track of what other councils are doing, what they're recommending. And then we use these examples as leverage for presenting advice ourselves. So it can be pretty basic sometimes that you turn to other councils that you think your government would compare themselves to. And then you say, look, even Sweden, they managed to have this debate, or even in the Netherlands, they have put forward this advice. It's not something that we're making up. And I think these very tangible and concrete examples, they have a huge power in terms of opening up the possibility of having a debate on the council or the recommendations and so forth. So my second advice would be look towards some of the council who's been around for a long time. Canada, I think Australia's been around for a while. In South Africa, the Climate Council is very much working on of just transition and in a more involving way than we do. In Europe, you have the British Climate Council, who's been around for a long time, us and a few others. So there's actually a possibility of going to a lot of different websites. Most of our work is published in English, and then you can pick and choose what you need of good examples.
Yeah, I wouldn't have much to add other than it's great to see so many people turning up today. I would really recommend looking at our toolkit when it comes out, because it has I think 15 steps to take in setting up a climate council, you know, and going through different phases of evolution. So, and it has case studies built within that. So really recommend using that if you can, and starting that strategy of how you'll engage with politicians, engage with other voices, and not be afraid to reach out to groups that might have expertise in certain areas, like Client Earth, with actually writing legislation and others. Yeah, it's exciting that you're thinking about this, and we are here to support you with that.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to look it, and maybe last two questions. But so in some councils there are only university professors, but in others there are three politicians and others from like enterprises. Which do you think is better?
Again, it really depends on the purpose of the council and what function it plays. I think it makes sense for South Africa to have politicians and interest stakeholders represented in the council, because what they do is very much involving the public in how should we transform South Africa, right? So we have a slightly different purpose, and so for this purpose, I think it makes sense to have university professors in the council, but we do also have a forum of stakeholders formally represented that we meet with 4 times a year. So this engagement with stakeholders, it's crucial. So it can never be a debate which is just taking place in universities.
Yeah, it's very hard to say, not having ever been to Japan, and I do really want to go one day, but you have a unique context that you need to work in. I would say that there's been some commentary from civil society groups around your relevant ministry, and having an independent voice could be really valuable to bring in some other perspectives. I understand that consultation has been quite difficult in recent years on climate issues. So would really, think carefully about your context and what works best for you in your country.
Thank you very much. It is really important, I think, to think about like what suits to each country. And is there any question from participants? If no, I think like that was the last question from participants in advance that I got. So thank you again, Lisa and Jeppe, for doing presentation and answering all the questions. It was really insightful, and I think it's really significant to establish climate change advisory bodies in Japan and also in all the countries in the world, especially in the context of in the environment where it is getting really difficult to achieve 1.5 degree goal these days. So thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing us to participate in the debate. It was very interesting, and good luck with the report and the further discussions.
Yeah, thank you so much.